Uhuru, brothers and sisters and comrades. This is Omale Shatila, chairman of the African People's Socialist Party, leader of the Uhuru movement and the International African Revolution. I want to welcome you to this discussion on today. It's an important discussion. In fact, it's a part of an ongoing discussion we've been having for some time now. It gets sharper almost every day because of attacks, egregious attacks on our people every day. And while we're speaking specifically to a situation that's happened here within the United States right now, and we're doing this because we have greater access to a greater number of people immediately here in the United States. Our party does, but we are everywhere. We are throughout the world, in Africa and other places. The infrastructure in many of the places where we are located is insufficient to support this kind of discussion using social media platforms, particularly in Africa, but in other places as well. Nevertheless, what we want to talk about today, while dealing specifically and immediately with events inside the United States, they have significant implications and applications to the struggle of our people globally. So even as this country, the United States, and much of the world is engrossed with the trial of Derek Chauvin, who on May 25th, 2020, in a very grotesque and public way, murdered George Floyd by choking him to death with his knee on his neck for almost 10 minutes. Even as this is occurring, and our people and the peoples of the world have had to see repeated views of this murder by Derek Chauvin and listen to testimony by African people and others who were there talking about their sense of outrage and sense of guilt for not intervening in that murder, and recognizing that peoples all around the world also saw that murder and watching this testimony that resulted in something like 10,000 demonstrations, protests, and even uprising within a 3-month period inside the United States, and something like protests in more than 60 countries outside of the United States, partially in sympathy with the situation of African people inside the United States, and also because the United States is the chief hegemon, the center of the global oppressive system based on colonialism, which is the domination of peoples by foreign and alien countries and governments. So there was a profound bit of unity with this struggle against colonialism. And many of the people who suffer from colonialism suffer from US colonialism, sometimes indirectly through these governments that have been imposed on them in Africa and some other places by the United States or by some other imperial power, especially like England and France, who right now are the leading forces in Europe in terms of dominating our people. So the things that we are talking about, while they speak specifically to the case of George Floyd, to the struggles that's happening in the United States, and they have implications for our struggles and the struggles of oppressed people globally. We've themed this, another one, we will fight back. And it was absolutely necessary to put forth this thing, especially because so many people saw what happened to George Floyd, and so many African people experienced a sense of guilt because nothing was done by the people who watched him murdered. And as we watched him murdered in our living rooms and in front of our computers over and over again during this trial, as we watched him slandered and our community slandered during this process, we recognize that this is taking us right to the cusp of a serious resistance that will be more concentrated, more defined moving forward. And even as this trial is going on of Derek Chauvin, the white man, who wearing a uniform of the US domestic military force called police, then we see 20-year-old young brother murdered in the suburb of the area where George Floyd was murdered, right in the suburb of Minneapolis, Minnesota, in a place called Brooklyn Center. And this is something that has exacerbated the anger and the obvious need being experienced by African people to involve ourselves in fighting and struggle. So we see this murder and say another one. We will fight back. And we're speaking here about Daunte Wright, who was just murdered. And we were watching the same group of forces who were in motion in Minneapolis, now in motion. These are the people who call themselves and have been appointed representatives of African people in this struggle that we're engaged in. And what is happening is that we're hearing these debates. We heard them during the trial, and we hear them during the trial of Derek Chauvin about whether or not there was a legal justification for the murder of George Floyd. And we're hearing this now about whether or not there was legal justification for the murder of young brother Daunte Wright. Editorials, even now, have been written about that. And because the white woman, Kimberly, I think her name is Kimberly Potter, claims that it was an accident. And there's video that suggests that she did not intend to shoot him. She only intended to tase him, to use this device that would cause excruciating pain and disable him. And so she said that I pulled out the wrong weapon against this 20-year-old, unarmed, very slightly built African man. I wanted one weapon and I pulled the wrong weapon. So this is the kind of debate that's occurring now. And given an opportunity, the rulers of this country, the pundits, those who apologize for this system, the media, will contain this discussion to questions of legality, looking at the case of Derek Chauvin. We've had testimony from cops, the chief of police, testimonies from people who are responsible for the utilization of this domestic military force in our communities, proclaiming that Derek Chauvin did not carry out policies the way they should be carried out, that he was some kind of rogue. They are moving as to try and distance themselves, distance the apparatus that has the responsibility for controlling African people, controlling oppressed people inside the United States and internationally, controlling others around the world, threatening people who are not controlled immediately and directly. So they are trying to distance themselves. And we see this happen time after time. This is why even you have Derek Chauvin being characterized, Chauvin being characterized as a former policeman. And you see this in every instance after the cop has killed somebody, done damage to us, and if there's any charge, if there's any discharge of him, they characterize this person as a former policeman. Right now, the woman, Kimberly Potter, is a former policeman because she has resigned. Of course, now she's facing second-degree murder charges. So we see the system quite willing, when necessary, when forced to, at least to offer a token response to a token gift or a parent gift to the oppressed by even charging them and sometimes perhaps occasionally, rarely convicting them. But this conviction is of the specific particular policeman, policewoman in this instance, hooray for the bourgeois colonial feminist movement, because now she has earned her spurs and got the job with the police department equal to white men who have been the colonizers, usually having the responsibility of keeping us under control and under domination. So this is how, given an opportunity, this discussion would be contained. And they work over time to contain it. We hear so-called civil rights leaders saying that somehow this trial of Derek Chauvin is some kind of referendum on US justice. We see articles and editorials in the Wall Street Journal saying that we can't jump the gun on this one, looking at what just happened to Dante Wright, that it seems to have been an accident. There does not appear to be any racial motivation to this murder. So this is the kind of thing that we're confronted with. And the only reason that we're having to deal with this kind of discussion, this really inanity and silliness, is because the US government has succeeded in shutting down our struggle, our revolution, when we were quite clear on what it is that we are fighting for. We were clear. It was this clarity of what our struggle was about, not some simpering declaration that Black Lives Matter, which is something that's being made to the oppressor, that does not inform the oppressed anything about what our problem is or how we should struggle, not something like that. I'm talking about when we had people on the ground like Mumia Abu-Jamal, who joined the Black Panther Party during the height of the Black Revolution of the 60s, not only in the United States, but revolutionary struggle that was going on among the peoples around the world. And it's important for us to understand that all the peoples of the world want to be free from foreign alien domination, whether they are in Vietnam or whether they're in Venezuela, or whether they're in Brooklyn, New York, or whether they are in some of these other places where we have to contend with this foreign and alien domination. Sometimes this foreign and alien domination is direct by the white man who is there in person and presides over openly over the apparatus of oppression. Sometimes when the masses rise up and begin to fight back, and the contradictions get so deep, then it becomes necessary for the white colonizers to disguise his rule, and to disguise his rule by putting African people, or putting a Vietnamese, or putting a Nicaraguan, or putting a Venezuelan, or putting somebody else up front. And so they rule indirectly. This is called indirect rule. This is an art and a science that's has devised by people, countries who have the responsibility of maintaining this colonial status quo that we experience under foreign and alien domination. One of the chief architects of this was a man whose name was Frederick Lugard. He was British. He is the one who wrote so much about indirect rule when faced with the resistance of the natives, because the Africans could see that this white man doesn't belong here, obviously doesn't work for us, and therefore they said, well, give him a black person, give him a white man in a black face, give him a white power in a black face. So the first we saw direct colonialism. This was what the white man, when he comes in his own face, and when he has to been, when our struggle and movement has developed to such a point that he can't do that anymore, he comes do indirect rule. He comes in the face of the colonized. He comes in our face. He looks just like us. He may even eat the same food, and he may even do the same dances, go to the same clubs sometimes that the oppressed will go to, but he doesn't represent us anymore. That's neo-colonialism. That's what Kwame Nkrumah called it. So we've got people like Mumia Abu-Jamal. We've got people like Sundiata Acoli. We've got people like Assata Shakur, who had to run for her life and now is in Cuba still with the threat of possibility of being kidnapped and brought back to this country under gunplay. And here's what we're looking at. We're talking about a situation today where all of the country, all of the governors and all of the representatives of US white power inside the United States are declaring that there's something wrong with the system of policing, et cetera, and perhaps something needs to be fixed. And then you got Dante Wright, who is happening even in the height of this trial, exacerbating the contradiction and the tensions that exist there in Minneapolis. And with all of this going on, then it becomes necessary for the rulers of this country again, to be able to disguise their rule. And they have the assistance of people who look just like us and who would facilitate their ability to say that our problem is that the system just has to be tweaked some more. It has to, people have to learn love as if that has something to do with it. And we're saying that in the face of what everybody has been forced to see right now, just as we were forced to see it in the 1960s, you gotta free Mumia, you gotta free Sundiata, you gotta free all of these African people and others who are in prison now for fighting back, for resisting this colonial terror. We're talking about a situation where we saw an entire community of African people bombed. This is in the 1980s, 84, 85, where in Philadelphia, and there was an African mayor, a neo-colonial mayor, that gave the order to bomb this community that destroyed 60 some odd houses, that murdered 11 men, women, and children of the MOVE organization there. And Mumia was a supporter of them there, and he's paying the price for being a supporter of the MOVE organization today by being stuffed in prison, at one time on death row, and even after they moved him formally from death row, they've created conditions that's almost destroying his life, and he's fighting for his life now. Free them. Free all of them. Free Mumia, free Sundiata, pay reparations to them and their family for the crimes that's already been committed against them, and all of the other political prisoners. This is what a real, genuine response by this government and by people who claim to recognize suddenly that there's something wrong with what the police does in our community. But the question is whether there is something wrong. And the question is if what we see in those instances where African people and Al Sharpton and Ben Crump are telling us to do, that somehow we stand up and we say we love everybody despite what's happening to us. There has to be peace, and all we got to do is vote to get our way out of here. Is that the appropriate response? Is this a response that comes naturally, normally from our community? We say no. We say the response that comes naturally, normally from our community is the same response that comes from other oppressed peoples around the world who recognize that they were colonized. They were colonized. There was a foreign and alien power that dominates their lives, that takes their resources, that humiliates them on a regular basis, that kills them regardless of what the law says, kills them regardless of what the law says, lynches them in public, just as what we're seeing happen in this country right now. But we have fought back. Sundiata fought back. Asada fought back. The Black Liberation Army fought back. Revolutionaries fought back and always fight back. In fact, the dignity of our community, of our people, can be found concentrated, located in those forces who have had the audacity to stand up and fight back. But it has not been easy subsequent to then. In the 60s, it was much easier because the revolution was the main trend in the world. But the United States government and other powers in this country who held up colonialism, who depend on colonialism, whose existence relies on their ability to be able to continue to suck the blood and resources from oppressed peoples around the world. This is the forces that we are up against. These are the forces that will do everything to maintain our oppression, maintain our colonial domination. So they will keep Sundiata locked up, and they will try to make sure that there is never another Sundiata, there's never another Black Liberation Army, there's never another revolutionary force that will rise up, and they promote this notion that there's something wonderful about being in America, about being loved, and by just having a movement that's designed not to win the power over our own lives so that we don't have to care of whether white people like us or not. No, they say that what has to happen is our movement has to be based on making white people like us. That's what the anti-racism movement is all about. They say our problem is the fact that white people don't like us. And then they come up sometimes when they get more sophisticated to talk about institutional racism. The truth of the matter is we are colonized, and colonialism looks the same all over the world with few exceptions. And so this is what our struggle has to be about, winning our freedom, our liberation. We can't have a movement that's based simply on responding to this incident and that being the strategic direction of our struggle. People get tired of that. Even when we see these uprisings, people who are demonstrating right now, and there are people, even as we're having this discussion, who are demonstrating in Brooklyn Center, in Wisconsin. There are people demonstrating in Minneapolis, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. There are people demonstrating right now, and they will demonstrate tomorrow, and they will demonstrate, and the police will attack them, and they will fight back, and then the thing is, to what end? And people can be tired out because then what are we getting out of it? What are we getting out of it except another demonstration? And the system loves that for you to do that, just to vent, which it opens up. They talk about free speech, etc., even though that's a joke. But the point is that as long as the only thing you're doing is venting, even throwing a brick, they have become so accustomed to dealing with us that protest has become a kind of a national pastime in this country. So they can kill an African, or 2 Africans, or 9 Africans, and there ain't no protest is gonna come. They can put somebody on trial for having murdered us, and they know that our people have come to the conclusion that they can't trust the justice system to do anything, and that there's going to be an uprising. They know, and they have this same process every time. It's like waiting for a hurricane to come in Florida. You know what you're supposed to do is you put up the plywood over the windows to protect the buildings. You sometimes try to secure your own property. You get some food and water that's going to carry you over the next few days and whatever, and you wait it out because that's the only thing that's going to happen, and that's not good enough. I'm talking about we have a tradition of fighting back. We will fight back. We just have to be in a situation where we know what we're fighting for, that there is some end, there is an end that we are fighting for, that there is some leadership that will take us from this place and from simply fighting one incident after the other incident. I mean, we talking about Mark Essex in 1972 and 73, who stopped everything in New Orleans from the top of the building of a Howard Johnson building with a rifle, and killed 7 policemen from that because they murdered African people. We're talking about a history of resistance that's happened throughout this country, and also we're talking about a history of murder. So we're not looking at something new when we see what happened to Dante Wright, and no matter what Sharpton and no matter what Ben Crump say about this, and who have turned this thing into an industry that brings tremendous resources, it's not new. I mean, somebody should go and look at 1919, what they call the Red Summer, where hundreds of white demonstrations, hundreds of attacks on African people throughout this country resulted in the deaths of hundreds of people who were murdered by white people, and then the National Guards that were sent out that were supposed to protect us joined in the murder of our people. The police helped them to murder us. Look at what happened throughout the South in the 1950s, when the police were the ones. The police is the one that created this person that the white man told you you're supposed to love above all because of some kind of good trouble, because he was somebody who was willing to be clubbed to death or near to death, because this is what our stance is supposed to be. But we will fight. We will fight back. Historically, we have done that. But in order to get to this place that we need to be, we have to understand some things about a movement. And I mentioned those forces. I mentioned Mark Essex, and I mentioned other forms of resistance. I mentioned the Black Liberation Army. There have been other examples. In recent history, there have been other examples. But historically, I mean, look at this glorious revolution that happened in Haiti. That shook up the whole world. The whole capitalist world was shaken by this revolution of Black people who rose up and inspired Black people all around the world. In Haiti, they weren't talking about fighting against racism. They were talking about taking the power of our own lives, and they fought and created temporarily a Black republic. And they're still paying the price for that today because they attacked and almost destroyed the capitalist system itself. You want to see capitalist revolutions where it's located, because the road to socialism painted Black. This painted Black because the whole capitalist system rests upon a foundation of colonialism. And African people are colonized. And if we want to be free, we have to fight against colonialism. What is the strategy? You got Sharpton there. Okay, Sharpton. Okay, L. what is the strategy for ending this? Voting for whom? You had us voting for Biden the last time. Biden is the one who created a crime bill, as they call it, it was a crime bill that was a weapon of colonial white power against our people. That's resulted in more than 1 million African people being in prison right now. It's resulted in 1 out of every 8 human beings in prison in the world today being an African in the United States. So you told us to vote for Biden. So is another Biden vote for Kamala, the prosecutor, Kamala Harris? Is this your solution? Of course it is. But the power has to be in the hands of the people, and we have to make this revolutionary struggle. The African People's Socialist Party, during the time where our revolution was under assault, when they were butchering Africans and people fighting for freedom around the world and inside this country. At the time frame that they killed little Bobby Hutton, 17-year-old member of the Black Panther Party in Oakland, California. At a time when they killed Fred Hampton, 21-year-old revolutionary Black Panther in Chicago, Illinois in 1969. And 4 days later, where they attacked the Black Panther office in Los Angeles, California. These were forces who were talking about wanting to be free, going beyond some simpering cry in opposition to what's now referred to as racism. They were talking about defeating imperialism. Imperialism is the expression of a social system that gets its name from empire. When Europe, which was the headquarters of empires, sent out their forces throughout the world to take people's land and to take people's freedom, and built themselves as a consequence of that. That's the imperialism that Sundiata was fighting against. That's the imperialism that Anthony Bottoms was fighting against, that Albert Noah Washington was fighting against, that revolutionary forces Sato was fighting against. This is what people were fighting against. They weren't fighting to make white people like us. They were fighting so that we can have the power, so it wouldn't matter whether white people liked us or not. You have to be the police. When I say police, what I really mean is that we have to have responsibility for our own security, our own community. And if we have responsibility for our own security, that means that we will secure ourselves, protect ourselves from the police of the colonizer. When you look at what's happening, that's the colonial police that's attacking us. So we've seen all this stuff happening. Now we're talking about Dante Wright. We've seen the African, bless himself. He was just stopped. Well, he was stopped in December in Virginia by the police. This guy is somebody who is in the U.S. military, and you see him with his hands out of the window to let them know that he's in uniform, U.S. military uniform. He says, "I'm on your side." He said, "You're doing this to me, despite the fact that I am out there trying to represent your country." This person was a relative of people who had been killed by the police. He was a relative of the brother who was murdered in Staten Island, I think it was, and choked to death. And the fact is that all of us as African people know somebody who's in prison, been to prison, been killed in our neighborhoods or something else. That's what happens to us, to people when they're colonized. So you need to be hooked up with, like, the African People's Socialist Party, because we have to get out of this. And we will fight back. We've seen that in history, where people need to be able to see have the long view, to see beyond what just happened in Brooklyn Center, to see beyond what just happened in Minneapolis, to see beyond the particular incidents where they're attacking us, and see the world that was constructed off of our enslavement and off our colonial domination. And then we have to build a program around that, so that we have the long view. And then, yes, we have to be able to deal with the specific incidents of terror that's being waged against us, but we have to have a program that takes us beyond that, so that we can have power in our own hands. We have to be a self-governing people. Any people with a national integrity, any people with integrity would refuse to be dominated by somebody else. We have to be a self-governing people, and not just self-governing, but we have to have government that's under the leadership of the African working class. We have to have government that takes back our Africa, that's making the white world rich, that's making other forces from China to Turkey, you name it, rich at our expense, where we are starving as a people all around the world because Africa came under assault. And they took us from Africa and dispersed us around the world, gave us these funny names that we are now running around with, assuming that we are part of the oppressor that's killing us. So we have to recognize that we are fighting against a whole international, a global colonial capitalist system that owes its existence to colonial slavery, the dispersal of African people around the world, the colonial domination of other peoples around the world, and that this whole system is in a shaky status today. It has deep and profound fissures that's splitting this society and splitting this country, and that is bringing into its serious disrepute among the peoples of the world. It no longer has the advantage of this notion that it is this shiny city on the hill that represents the aspirations of the masses of peoples around the world. That's changed, that's over. So that gives greater significance to what we do, because the peoples of the world are engaging this entity in struggle against colonialism, to take their resources, to take their freedom, and to wield those resources and freedom to their own advantage. That's what we have to do as well. So this is not a new discussion that I'm trying to engage you in. This is something that our party has understood forever. In fact, we came into existence as a political party with a recognition that we had to complete that revolution that's responsible for Mamiya being locked up, for Fred Hampton being killed, for Bobby Hutton being killed, for Patrice Lumumba being killed, for Kwame Nkrumah being overthrown, for Che Guevara being wounded, captured, and murdered. We are talking about building a revolutionary movement that completes that process, that struggle that people have been fighting for to win their freedom, not to be accepted by the oppressor. What kind of movement you got? You are enslaved, and your movement is about making the slave master like you, being accepted by the slave master. The truth of the matter is that as long as there's slavery, that's the condition for the existence of slaves and slave masters. As long as there's colonialism, that's the condition for the existence of the colonized and the colonizer. As long as there's oppression, which is slavery, which is colonialism, that's the condition for the existence of the oppressor and the oppressed. If we are oppressed people, then the oppression comes from somewhere. We're not imposing it on ourselves, despite every attempt that's being made to say that we did it to ourselves. George Floyd killed himself. The same thing they're saying now about the young brother Dante Wright, that he is responsible for his own death. We are responsible for our own enslavement, our own oppression, our own starvation, our own joblessness, our own lack of health care. We are the ones who are responsible for the fact that Africa now is in the hands of our oppressor. What we are saying is that if you believe that, we are assuming responsibility for our freedom as a people, not to get you to like us, not to join your apparatus, but to create our own in the process of destroying yours, your control over us. So let me just say, we are the African People's Socialist Party, and we have a 14-point platform that actually was adopted first in 1979 and then again in 1981. And I just want to show you points number 8 and 9. I want to give you points number 8 and 9 because they show direction. They show direction. They state what the problem is and what we have to do. They state something about who we are as an organization that with a long view that we've been fighting for all this time. Not just around this case, but this case is something that we deal with from the perspective of an African internationalist worldview that we have and a strategy that we've created in a program that speaks to our condition. Number 8, this is number 8. of the 14-point program. We want the immediate withdrawal of the US police from our oppressed and exploited communities. That's simple. We want the immediate withdrawal of the US police from our oppressed and exploited communities. We believe that the various US police agencies which occupy our communities are arms of the US colonialist state, which is responsible for keeping our people enslaved and terrorized. This statement enough is alone that explains from our perspective what it is we're looking at in Brooklyn Center, what it is that we're looking at with the murder of Dante Wright, with the attack on the second lieutenant in Virginia by the police. We say, we believe that the US police agencies do not serve us, but instead represent the first line of US defense against the just struggle of our people for peace, dignity, and socialist democracy. Therefore, we believe the US police is an illegitimate standing army, a colonial army in the African community, and must withdraw immediately from our community to be replaced by our liberation forces whose struggles in defense of our community and against our oppression demonstrate their loyalty to our community and their willingness to serve in its interests. And then number 9, we want, number 10 is we want the right to build an African People's Liberation Army. We believe that true freedom, although often taken away, cannot be given to a people. We believe that African people are our own liberators and that we have a right and obligation to build an African People's Liberation Army to defend our political gains, our freedom fighters and communities, and to win our actual freedom from our oppressive colonial slave masters. We believe that neither meaningful freedom nor guaranteed political and social gains, nor genuine liberation are possible without the assuring existence of an African People's Liberation Army. We believe further that the only legitimate wars are wars of national liberation and wars to oppose imperialist aggression, and that therefore the only legitimate military force for Black people to serve with are military forces which defend liberty and repel imperialist aggression. Such a force will be the African People's Liberation Army. So this is who we are, and I think it's important to say that. And this is a part of a program. This is the program, a part of the program and the strategic objectives that we've created for a long time. These are the things we've been working for more than 50 years. That's why we create institutions for independence. That's why we have more than 50 economic institutions. That's why we're developing such institutions, not only in the United States, but right now in what they call South Africa. And we intend to do it throughout the world, so that we want to negate the power and influence. That's what we call dual and contending power. We're not trying to exist side by side. We want this power that we create, our economy, to contend with the power and the economy of the capitalists and colonial capitalists. And I just want to say that some time ago, this is July 1919. This is during the whole Red Summer, and that doesn't even speak to it, because the murders, the mass murders, and that had used military forces and police organizations against us, even though this was called the Red Summer, it was before and after with massive intensity. But Claude McKay, who was a poet, he wrote a poem, if you want to call it that. And it was called If We Must Die. So if we must die, let it not be like hogs, hunted and pinned in an inglorious spot, while round us bark the mad and hungry dogs, making their mock at our accursed lot. If we must die, oh, let us nobly die, so that our precious blood may not be shed in vain. Then even the monsters we defy shall be constrained to honor us though dead. O kinsmen, we must meet the common foe. Though far outnumbered, let us show us brave, and for their 1,000 blows deal one death blow. What though before us lies the open grave? Like men, we'll face the murderous, cowardly pack, pressed to the wall, dying, but fighting back. This was Claude McKay in 1919. And the spirit of that poem is something that's represented in the resistance of our people. That's always there. There's always some form of resistance. But we've created an organization, a party, that has more than 40 years, almost 50 years of experience, working a strategic program for our liberation that understands that we must defeat this colonial capitalism, that it's not just some empty struggle of words that we engaged in when we talk about people who would just have us talking about Black Lives Matter. We say Black Power matters. That gives us an explanation, tell the people what they must struggle for, even if we are not there. When the people understand that Black Power is what we're fighting for, we say, down with colonialism. Colonialism must go. This is what our slogans have to do to be able to give the people some direction of what it is they're fighting for, because fighting against racism, fighting to make white people like us doesn't do us any good at all. And we will not be respected by ourselves. We will not be respected by the peoples of the world as long as we are on our belly whining that Black Lives Matter and talking about anti-racism kind of talk. We have to lead this struggle. We have to win our freedom. We have to become a self-governing people in a process that is designed to destroy colonialism forever and to destroy the social system of capitalism that rests upon that foundation. Death to colonial capitalism, victory to the oppressed of the world, victory to the African people, build the African People's Socialist Party, Easway, lay to E Africa, which means Africa is our land. We fight everywhere we are located as a people. That's the thing that will allow us to surround our enemy and get rid of this sense of feeling that we are surrounded all the time by our oppressor. Go to apspuhuru.org, apspuhuru.org. Join this incredibly powerful trek that we've been involved on as a party, and our people have for more than 50 years or so, and our people have been involved in ever since Africa came under assault, and the first white man put his foot on the continent of Africa and forced an African person to do something against our will, and responsible for dispersing us around the world, stealing all our loot, stealing all our resources, stealing our identity, stealing everything they could. We must be free. So we say, go to apspuhuru.org, Vanguard up.